Spoiler alert for the following programs. I will be discussing these throughout the episode at multiple different times, so if you don't want spoilers, I would wait to watch this until you've seen everything. Or unless someone watches it for you and tells you what parts you can watch. You have clicked on this video for one of two reasons. 1, you have no idea what a MacGuffin is and you're wondering why it's in a video title. Or 2, you know exactly what a MacGuffin is and you're here to learn more about it or judge my explanation skills. Or, bonus reason, it pops up on your recommended or some other form of media. Whatever, on to the MacGuffins! The term MacGuffin was coined by a screenwriter friend of Alfred Hitchcock, and as he explained, it's what the spies are after, but the audience doesn't care. A MacGuffin is a type of plot device that drives the plot solely by being wanted, regardless of what it actually is. And that's the biggest thing about it. It doesn't matter what it is, it's only important because people want it. You could change it out for pretty much anything and the plot would be almost entirely unchanged. And because this plot device is so general, we get categories. The power-up MacGuffin. They are exactly what they sound like. Typically ending up in the hands of bad guys, they could be anything and everything as long as they do the power-up thing. All of the MCU Infinity Stones, except the Time Stone, pretty much apply here. Temporarily makes Ronan stronger, temporarily makes Malekith stronger, the list goes on. Beyond that, they don't really do anything, they're just wanted by everyone in Infinity War and Endgame. The Death MacGuffin. Again, exactly what it sounds like. You get your hands on this one, you just unsubscribed from life. Congratulations. I don't know if there's anyone who doesn't know this at this point, but what happened when the Nazis opened the Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark? They got melted into nothingness, turned to dust. I have heard turned into strawberry jam be used as a description. They died, and it was the Ark's fault. Or kind of their fault, because they opened it in the first place. Next up is the Tactical MacGuffin. Typically showing up in sci-fi and super spy plots, these are often flash drives or briefcases with highly classified information that must be protected at all costs to prevent horrible outcomes A, B, and C. They're more like keys to the other parts of the stories, but those parts we hardly ever get to see. Bellerophon, the cure to the bioweapon Chimera in Mission Impossible 2, does prevent the death of Tom Cruise's love interest and, probably thousands of innocent people, but it's still pretty much a MacGuffin since it's being chased after for however long and the majority of its use is not seen on screen. The fake or worthless MacGuffin. Everyone wanted it for a reason that is not true. This MacGuffin will be pursued throughout the story, and by the end, the characters will get nothing out of it. Typically, you can find a theme for greed somewhere in these, or the journey being the real treasure, etc., but typically what they find just isn't valuable. The most classic example of this is the Maltese Falcon. Big shiny bird statue with untold value everybody wants, and the bundle they actually get turns out to be an excellent replica, and the real statue isn't even found. In the movie or ever, I don't think. A lot of times this one also applies to treasure hunting plots, either because they don't end up getting the treasure, it's somehow cursed or all death-causing, or it's not what they originally thought. That or it's valuable in a different way, like only to a specific group of people, or not in a typical monetary way, like cultural artwork or historical archives. Even a story about something that acts as like a life lesson or something. The walking or breathing MacGuffin. This is a MacGuffin that is a person, or at least a character instead of an object. Helpless child, whistleblower, super smart scientist person, household pet, the list goes on. They're a MacGuffin because they're normally in need of some kind of protection and can't really do anything to help themselves or other characters. This is why they're made children most of the time, since children typically don't know how to defend themselves yet or are incapable of doing so. A perfect example, Grogu from The Mandolorian. Primarily in the first season. Later he actually does stuff that shifts the plot and he has little solo moments, but early on it was Mando's job to rein him in and keep him safe. This is, again, why a lot of times children end up being MacGuffins. Staying on the Star Wars trend, Omega in The Bad Batch is also a MacGuffin. Sometimes. But I wouldn't say as often because she definitely has her own agency throughout most of the series, especially in the second season. It's only a couple episodes she's kind of powerless. Chosen ones can sometimes be walking MacGuffins too. Until they unlock their powers or receive training, learn their fate, whatever, they're often hunted at the start of the story for a reason they might not even know. It kickstarts the plot, and in cases of Chosen One to defeat you and Chosen Heir, you get a plot that comes with it. But Chosen One characters often don't stay MacGuffins. MacGuffin characters can develop into active characters, unlike normal MacGuffins, which are inanimate objects and incapable of character development, or feelings. They can transform into non-MacGuffins too, but in a different way than a breathing MacGuffin can. Grogu and Omega both learn useful skills thanks to their respective space dads. Chosen ones typically have a mentor character and a supporting cast to lift them up and get them going on their destiny, and maybe help them claim some magical artifacts or antagonist repellent. Lastly, the collection MacGuffin. Also known as plot coupons, they aren't necessarily considered MacGuffins in a group, but individually that's exactly what they are, since they don't do anything until they're in a set. In some other versions of the comics and animated series, the Infinity Stones don't immediately fall into this category, but they definitely do in the MCU. Thanos and the Avengers spend the entirety of Infinity War trying to collect all the Infinity Stones just to execute or prevent the erasure of half the population of the universe. They don't use them individually like they do in the show Avengers Assemble, and you don't even find out what the Soul Stone is for, just that you need it for the set. By the way, apparently it manipulates the soul of a person and kinda controls them and has some power over life and death. Just an FYI for the Marvel peeps out there. The Dragon Eye lenses in the final season of How to Train Your Dragon Race to the Edge also come to mind, as individually they mean nothing, but together they lead to the King of Dragons. They have individual episodes where they go chasing after some of the lenses, and those are the specific lenses that become MacGuffins, since the others just sort of fall into their laps during their other adventures. Something is specifically not a MacGuffin if it matters what it is, or if it actually does something important throughout the story. Like I said before, what makes something a MacGuffin is that it's only important because it's wanted. It doesn't do anything beyond that. The theoretical use, if there even is one, doesn't come into play. That didn't happen with these. Serious spoilers coming, by the way. First off, the Dragon Gem in Raya and the Last Dragon, because I keep hearing it called a MacGuffin, and it's not. The theoretical use was that the pieces of the gem, if brought together, could stop the Droon, like it had before it was broken. Not only had it fulfilled that theoretical use previously, it did more than just what the characters thought it might. The pieces repelled the Droon just like water. Reforming the gem brought everyone back, along with the dragons, and it also resurrected Sisu, which made everyone much happier with the ending. Next up is the treasure in both the first National Treasure movie and the Uncharted movie. I would only say this doesn't count because they actually found the treasure in both movies. They got a small piece of a finder's fee in National Treasure, along with a credit, and in Uncharted they got to keep some of it because Tom Holland, Nathan Drake, is a really good pickpocket. They got something out of the hunt, otherwise these treasure caches would, in fact, be MacGuffins, like they were in National Treasure 2. I do want to clarify real quick though, National Treasure 2 is really only a MacGuffin by the MacGuffin standards that I'm currently thinking about. If you disagree, that's perfectly fine, just please tell me why I'm wrong. Some MacGuffins are actually choosy magical artifacts, and are only MacGuffins in the hands of non-chosen ones, like the Forge of Solus Prime in Transformers Prime. Basically just a giant hammer in the hands of anyone who can lift it, the Forge can create anything the user wants, but only a Prime can wield it for its true purpose, which is why Optimus can use it, and so can Megatron after he cuts off a Prime's arm and attaches it to himself. That guy is just something else in the later seasons, I swear. Anyways, the Forge of Solus Prime is able to create anything the user wants out of any raw material. It is not a MacGuffin when Optimus and Prime Hand Megatron are holding it because it has a theoretical use, making anything when you hit it enough, and it is performing that use when each of them use it to make cool giant swords. Now, I've been talking about theoretical uses a bit. We can know what something can do or should do, but that use can never be important, or at least never shown, otherwise it is not a MacGuffin. Unobtainium from Avatar is a cool superconductor thing humans want to solve their energy crisis, and it's also shiny and just generally worth a lot of money, but it's also important because humans want it, and that drives them to attack the Na'vi, which is the main conflict. The superconductor part of it literally never comes up. It's not even that clear in the first place. I actually forgot about it until I rewatched it recently, and I bet if you asked anyone who's only seen the movie once or twice, they won't remember either. A theoretical use for a MacGuffin is fine to have, it just can't factor into the progression of the plot, or actually turn from a theoretical use into a real use. That's why some things are specifically not MacGuffins. If you're listening to this and you're thinking you've written a MacGuffin and you don't want to have this interchangeable object and pretty much solely greed-fueled plot, don't worry, you don't have to delete anything. MacGuffins don't have to stay MacGuffins. Let's say the MacGuffin is something that will be used to complete a doomsday weapon, and that actually happens, and plot-relevant things start unfolding. It's not much of a MacGuffin anymore. It's part of the doomsday weapon. If a theoretical use eventually becomes reality, then the object started out as a MacGuffin and is now no longer a MacGuffin. This could apply to the Forge of Souls Prime, which actually switches pretty frequently before eventually becoming permanently a MacGuffin when it runs out of power, and then gets broken by a giant robot dragon. This also often applies to cures used to help somebody on screen, something like Bellerophon, and walking and breathing MacGuffins, which I explained earlier. There is, however, a significant difference between MacGuffins and a Chekhov's gun. With both tropes, it doesn't really matter what it is. But unlike with a MacGuffin, the Chekhov's gun will be fired. It's an object, or even a person, that is mentioned in passing, seen in the background of multiple shots, or just generally dismissed at first. But by the end, it's extremely important. Key to the doomsday device, chosen one weapon, secret informant, whatever. It's all based on the idea that you shouldn't include anything that is unimportant to the story. One of those everything is relevant situations. Think about the Time Stone from Doctor Strange, the final magic bean in Jack the Giant Slayer, or Joe's former singing career in The Man Who Knew Too Much. In Doctor Strange, while fooling around with the Eye of Agamotto, Strange discovers a spell about Dormammu and how to use the Time Stone. Wong and Mordo warn him that he can't fool around with that stuff without risking getting stuck in a time loop or never having existed in the first place. They also, a little later in the movie, explain how Dormammu exists outside of time, and can therefore grant eternal life, but not without a price. But the use of the eye is not really talked about otherwise, and it really isn't thought of as being important, not even to the bad guys. But lo and behold, Strange defeats Dormammu by trapping him in a time loop using the eye, only breaking it if he swears to take his zealots and leave Earth forever. In Jack the Giant Slayer, as the name implies a retelling of the classic Jack and the Beanstalk, the magic beans are slowly used up throughout the movie in variously chaotic encounters until there's only one left, having been saved by Jack when the main stash was stolen by one of the main bad guys. This jerk noble named Roderick who's been trying to marry the much younger princess, but don't worry, he dies. Anyway, this last bean, which Jack had stored in his locket, was thrown down the throat of the two-headed giant general. And well, you can imagine what happens when you swallow a magic bean meant to grow beanstalks. The Man Who Knew Too Much, a classic Hitchcock film, has a Chekhov's gun in the form of a song, and Jo, the mother of the kidnapped boy, and her powerful voice left from a professional singing career. Her loud scream in the middle of a crowded theater throws off an assassin's aim, and a song she sings with her son at the beginning of the movie leads her to finding him in a large house where he is being held, because he starts loudly singing along. The reunion is very sweet, but also stressful because, kidnappers. Despite the vagueness of a MacGuffin, there's only a few plots that seem to repeat over and over. First up is the MacGuffin race. As the name implies, it's when two or more parties are trying to find the MacGuffin first for whatever theoretical use it has. Sometimes it's one party and they're racing against time, but more commonly there is another group of antagonists there to cause problems and gloat every 20 minutes or so. A lot of times you'll see everyone get there at the same time, or the bad guys get there first and the good guys catch up, or vice versa. Either way, there's normally some epic showdown and the MacGuffin is claimed or lost or, whatever. In the cases with death MacGuffins, the first one to win the race is actually the unfortunate one, and our main cast gets to not die because the bad guys just did that part for them. Yay! Another plot is the MacGuffin version of Keep Away. Normally only lasting a certain period of time, like until the MacGuffin is locked in a vault, or the bad guy gets it and uses it and it's not a MacGuffin anymore. The Keep Away plot is where the main cast or character finds the MacGuffin, or receives the MacGuffin from some random character who dies off screen, and now the bad guys are after them for the MacGuffin. These normally end with the MacGuffin getting handed off to the proper authorities, used up, or getting destroyed or lost permanently. Very similar to Keep Away, and a pretty simple sounding plot on its own, the transport mission. Get the MacGuffin from point A to point B. Sounds pretty straightforward until you remember you're watching this for a reason, and the designated antagonists leap out of the bushes, and some random, or maybe not so random character, conveniently explains what's happening. Showing up more in spy movies, the characters encounter all these different obstacles, either having been created by the antagonist or just being coincidental, in their efforts to get the MacGuffin somewhere it needs to be. I will note, with these ones, the antagonists, if they get their hands on it at all, will normally only be able to hold on to the MacGuffin for a little while until our main cast gets it back and it's delivered to point B. Hence the transport part. But, as with pretty much any trope, this isn't necessarily a hard rule, it's just a more common thing. Lastly, collect them all. Pretty much only found with the collection MacGuffins, these plots involve the characters trying to get all the MacGuffins first to do something. Because bringing the MacGuffins together actually does something, these tend to shift to non-MacGuffins in the third act of the plot, whether it's the protagonist using the MacGuffins or the antagonist. It isn't guaranteed, but the good guys being like, "We did it, woohoo!" and conveniently holding the MacGuffins up for the bad guy's evil bird to snatch does seem to happen a lot. Not to mention, if we spent all this time collecting the MacGuffins and we never got to see what they did, the plot would be kind of anticlimactic. And that's what antagonists are for. I said this with pretty much all of these, but similar to how there's only a few types of MacGuffin plots, there's only a few endings. With most MacGuffins, the MacGuffin is safely stored or handed off, destroyed or permanently lost, or used by the bad guys or even the heroes in a moment of crisis. I honestly can't think of any other possible endings for MacGuffins, unless the MacGuffin was a breathing MacGuffin and is now a full-fledged character or implied to go off and live their own happy existence. I would like to add, though, that characters are an essential part of MacGuffin stories. Often they are more important than the MacGuffin itself. What their motivations are regarding the MacGuffin, how they develop over the course of the story, the relationships they build on the adventure, platonic, romantic, found family, I don't care, I've seen them all. Not to mention, if there's adventures afterwards, the potential consequences, both positive and negative, from this experience. What those are all up to you. There aren't really any specific character tropes that can be paired with MacGuffins, since they can happen in almost any setting. And I will say again, that's not a bad thing, so don't panic. To round this off, I want to go over some themes. A common theme in plenty of the examples I described is selfishness versus selflessness, and greed generally being a bad thing. Over the course of the story, the characters see what greed gets you in the end, and maybe even learn to be less greedy themselves. They also often learn to value each other and their loyalty over whatever MacGuffin they've been searching for. Because while protagonists tend to stay together, antagonists tend to fall apart. Greed breeds betrayal in these stories, let me tell you. In the fourth Uncharted game, an entire pirate colony destroyed itself, driven by greed and paranoia over a treasure they had amassed. And in the modern day, Nathan Drake is the only one level-headed enough to keep the same thing from happening to his crew. In the end, the bad guy is literally crushed by the gold. Nice bit of symbolism right there. Another theme tends to be that the journey was the real prize. I find these show up a lot in cursed, death, and worthless MacGuffin stories because the characters don't really get anything else out of it. They're not completing a mission, in fact they're normally failing at their mission, and they don't get what they're looking for. This theme can also show up with walking or breathing MacGuffins, since their relationship with the main protagonist could end up being more valuable to both of them than whatever they were worth before, like Grogu in the Mandolorian. This goes back to characters being one of the more important aspects of a story with a MacGuffin, since their relationships and motivations often keep us invested. In all honesty, I have pretty much nothing against MacGuffins. I think they're good plot devices, but there are situations where something really shouldn't be a MacGuffin, or the fact that it's a MacGuffin gets annoying. In conclusion, I never thought I'd say MacGuffin this many times in one day, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Now, go pet a cat or something. Unless you're allergic, then don't. In that case, hug a stuffed animal. It's cathartic.